Our main character died as a typical 9-to-5 office drone and woke up in the body of Alantalatio, the third son of a total trash noble family. Life should have been a breeze until he remembered this world. This is Psyche Delir, the game he used to play, and in 15 years, greedy entities known as the deadly sins will emerge. When they arrive, greed, wrath, sloth, pride, and lust, the kingdom and the Paliseo territory will fall. Ellen has no special powers, but he has one major advantage. He knows the future of the game, so he comes up with a dangerous plan. Before the deadly sins awaken, he will find them while they are still children, save them from their brutal pasts, and change their paths. 2 months after making that call, he has already secured his personal knight, Robin, at the office. Raban reports that he successfully rescued the orphans and brought them to the designated orphanage, and among them is a little girl named Jutia. Alan is thrilled to hear this, and it further confirms his hunch that Zeban is truly the real deal. Zeban is confused about whether he's actually being praised or not, since he's hard to read with that poker face. Elon agrees with him and tries to force a smile, but it only makes him look sketchier. This is quite a struggle for him, because his original face was pretty expressive, but it seems his emotions don't show up on his current face at all. Regardless, Iburn still thanks Alan for the obvious compliment. Betrayal is everywhere in this game, but Eber is a top-tier supporting character, a rare gem who never betrays his master. As soon as Alan found him, he hired him without a second thought. Eber then confirms with Alan that the raid was indeed to rescue Jutia, and he was right. Eber finally understood why Alan was so focused on Jutia, because even as a veteran mercenary, he could tell Jutia wasn't just some ordinary kid. She was basically a beast, making Eber wonder why she let herself get caught so easily. Alan then asked, "Eber, why didn't you just bring her back to the mansion, since that would have been way easier?" Alan praised Eber for his sharp observation, and although it seemed like he was sleeping on her potential, keeping her at the orphanage was all part of Alan's master plan. Jutia Blutia belongs to the Oddblood tribe, who channel power through a contract with an eldritch entity from another dimension. Jutia would later grow up to be the Sin of Wrath. Among the 5 deadly sins, she was given a label that made her look like a monster that shouldn't even exist. She was a beast who had caused hundreds of deaths. But if she can grow up in peace, she won't be part of the downfall facing Alan. He had just defused the first landmine, and since he couldn't spill the real reason, he decided to cap and invent a fake excuse so Eber would believe in leaving Jutia. There. Alan thought up a goofy reason, and Eber totally bought it. Alan said the time wasn't ripe yet, and he told Eber to make sure no one else knew what they were up to. He also ordered Eber to provide whatever the orphanage needed. Alan then handed a letter to Eber, telling him to give it to Jutia. Eber asked if the letter was important, and Alan said it was just a letter to help Jutia settle in. Alan believed the letter would be great for reassuring the girl, since she had endured a brutal human experiment. As for Eber, he was very impressed that his master even went through the trouble of writing a letter, and he promised to deliver it safely. Though he didn't know if the letter would actually comfort Jutia or not, Alan felt he had to at least try. Obviously, he had embedded a hidden message. Actually tucked away between the formal pleasantries in the letter was something he'd heard dozens of times while replaying the game. It was a calming message from the Archbishop, meant to handle the Sin of Wrath. However, this message usually came too late in the game. But Elan believed that giving Jutia this message early would help steer her onto the right path. Elan couldn't believe he was trying to befriend a literal monster. But since they worshipped an entity from another world, he was confident it would work. When Jutia received the letter, she took a moment to read it through, and in that instant, Eber could feel a massive surge of mana radiating from her small body. It was insane. Basically, she was a strange child who seemed completely emotionless. Jutia then asked, "Eber, was Alan really the one who sent this letter?" With fear creeping through his entire body, Eber said yes. Jutia gave off a truly terrifying aura, before asking, "Zeban, why didn't Alan show up himself?" Zeban couldn't believe she was already at such an elite level at her age. That's why her mana could be seen with the naked eye. Zeban then told Jutia that Alan said the time wasn't right yet. After hearing this, Jutia finally calmed down. And this was also thanks to the hidden message Alan had placed in the letter. Jutia knew it was something only her worthy master could possibly know. With a look of joy and an overwhelming aura, she said that finally she understood her master's will. Meanwhile, Elan was in bed, brainstorming how to secure the next person on the list to help extend his seemingly short-lived existence. Shortly after, Ellen was in the library, trying to find clues about the third sin when Evan barged in, reporting that he had successfully rescued the second sin you mentioned. Even though he looked completely burnt out, Alan still asked, "Yvonne, did you treat the kid right?" Yvonne assured him that he had done everything requested. After saving the child from the illegal slave market, suddenly Alan's trash older brother, Tonio, stomped into the room and wasted no time using Alan as a doormat. He acted surprised that an idiot like Alan actually decided to read books in the library. Alan stayed quiet, but this just triggered Tonio, who screamed at Alan, telling him he better answer when a superior is talking to him. Alan couldn't believe the previous owner of this body survived this long, since Tonio was always looking for smoke. Alan wanted to clap back at him, but he knew better than to act up. He quickly bowed like a slave, telling Tonio that he'd like to excuse himself from the library, since his brother wanted to use it. Tonio mocked him, saying Alan finally knew his place. Suddenly a knife flew toward them, missing Tonio's head by a hair. Turns out the knife came straight from the eldest son, Leo. Leo said he didn't want any noise this early in the morning. The tension between the two spiked instantly as they started throwing death threats at each other. Alan quietly crawled away from them, because he wanted no part of their drama. This family was nothing more than side characters, wiped out very early on. And even though they were a powerful family, the two trashy older brothers were always locked in a fierce battle to seize the position of head of the house. One was known as the King of Flesh, while the other was the drug kingpin. Basically, the two of them were kings of the underworld, and no one with a brain would ever dare mess with them. Alan tried to crawl out of the room, while the other two were turning everything upside down. Alan realized that his best bet was to live like a total incompetent loser. If he wanted to survive for long, Alan went back to his room and flopped onto the sofa to catch a break. On the other hand, Yvonne wondered how someone as seemingly useless as Alan could uncover these human experiments. Alan looked incredibly fragile, like he couldn't even take care of himself. Yet for some reason, he knew about top-secret foreign affairs. Regardless, he still saw Alan as a truly bizarre person. The kid he finally rescued was considered extremely dangerous, with power that could literally end the world. Basically, the boy was saved in the kingdom of Kalen, home to an illegal slave market. With this move, Alan managed to rescue the second sin, Zeus. After Zeus was sold into slavery, he was abused and passed around like a used rag. Because of this, he eventually became the sin of sloth, one of the 5 great sins. After Zeus lost it, he wiped out kingdoms in the most horrific way imaginable, something no one thought was even possible. Even most players were left traumatized by Zeus's sheer brutality. After he annihilated his enemies, given how dangerous he was, Alan told Yvonne to handle him with kid gloves. Yvonne then asked Alan if the letter he sent to Jutia was about the second child, and Alan confirmed it. Besides the major message in the recent letter, he had slipped in other vital intel too. Alan had instructed Jutia to look after the kid, because he was so weak, and just as the master ordered, Jutia did exactly the right thing. She approached Zeus to help pull him out of his mental breakdown, telling him he had been chosen by a great man. Jutia told Zeus that he'd get his revenge on everyone who hurt him if he could serve Alan with absolute loyalty. With Jutia's help, Zeus can now unleash his power, while keeping it under control. On the other hand, Alan was panicking because he had no clue where the third boss was. Suddenly, when Eben entered the room to tell Alan that the second son, Tonio, was dead, Alan was completely shook. This was because Tonio wasn't supposed to die yet. A funeral was soon held for Tonio, but even in the main hall, their father was just fooling around with girls, acting like he didn't give a damn that his own son had just passed away. Meanwhile, Alan found Tonio's accidental fatal fall extremely sus, as that's not how it went down in the game. In the game, Leo had to struggle a lot to take Tonio out. However, things had changed because Alan could clearly see Leo smirking over Tonio's corpse. Despite that, Alan believed his only priority was to make sure he gathered all 5 great sins. A year later, everything in the house seemed more stable than ever, since there were no more succession disputes, and Leo had also taken over his brother's drug operations. During that year, basically, Alan had become pen pals with Jutia. They were constantly writing to each other, and because things were going so well, the orphanage kept receiving a long list of donations. Yvonne then told Alan that he had found a lead on what he was looking for. Alan was hyped to hear this, because it basically meant there was an ancient record of the third boss. Alan was satisfied to finally locate the third boss. For Alan, it was a peaceful evening, but the same couldn't be said for a certain drug distribution site. 2 high-ranking officers under Leo arrived at the warehouse only to find dozens of their members lying in pools of their own blood. Those still alive began to commit suicide, as if they had lost control of their bodies. They plunged knives into their own throats in the most horrific ways. The 2 officers soon met the same fate as their subordinates. It turns out the one behind all this was Riez, and he was currently under Jutia's supervision. After they finished wiping out the bad guys, Zeus asked Jutia if their actions actually meant anything, and Jutia assured him that they did. Jutia asked Zeus if he felt any pity for those thugs now, but he said no, since they were the ones getting everyone hooked on drugs. He was just curious about the significance of it all, regarding their revenge plot. Jutia then guaranteed him that this would set the stage for the return of their master. And since he was about to make his comeback, they couldn't let his throne be messed with. Zeus now finally understood everything that Jutia had been preaching to him, and before leaving the scene, they made sure the warehouse was completely totaled. They left a blue moon symbol at the site, because they saw themselves as the blue moon, as Alan's blades. One more year passed. Everything seemed to be going smoothly when Yvon came to report that he had also rescued the fifth child. The fifth child had also been sent to the orphanage, and Alan couldn't hide his joy at having finally settled his biggest worry. Because of his hard work, Alan didn't mind treating Yvon to the best delicacies he could get his hands on. Finding the third sin, greed, was the hardest part, but they pulled it off thanks to his game knowledge. Yvon had done everything possible to make sure everything worked out in the end. Alan then told Yvon that he could take a break for a while, since he had been on the move for quite a long time. Yvon asked him if the orphanage mission was complete, and he said yes. Yvon was relieved to hear this, and he asked Alan if he was unhappy, because he didn't look happy at all. But Alan assured him that he was very happy. In fact, he insisted that he was smiling, even though his face said otherwise. Yvon had no choice but to believe what Alan said. Alan lay on the ground feeling relieved that everything was going exactly as planned. Since those kids only became villains due to their tragic pasts, he had made it his mission to rescue them all, something he didn't think he could actually pull off before. Alan then asked Yvon about the situation at the orphanage, and Yvon handed him a letter. Yvon assured him that everything was going smoothly just as expected. Apparently at first those children were like broken dolls, but somehow they had become much more cheerful. Alan was relieved to hear this, as there would be no reason to hire extra caretakers. Alan felt proud of Jutia, because he hadn't expected the little girl to handle the pressure of caring for the kids so well. Alan suspected it was easy for her, because of her background, which was deeply rooted in the orphanage. Alan then told Yvon that from everything he'd seen, Jutia was a good kid. In the letter she sent, she reassured Alan that he had nothing to worry about, since everything was taken care of. Alan expressed how proud he was to see the children growing up properly, as all 5 of them were developing quite well. Alan concluded that the environment played a massive role in this. Yvon then asked Alan when he planned to meet the kids, since he had mentioned he would at some point. Deep down, Alan had no intention of meeting them in person. He knew it would be good to meet face-to-face, to build a closer bond, but he was terrified of the personalities he'd seen in the game. Even so, he believed things would be okay, since he saved them before they awakened. Alan then lied to Yvon, saying that maybe he'd try to meet them later on. Now that the rescue mission was over, Alan believed that the next thing on his bucket list was to learn some self-defense skills, because magic requires actual talent. Alan had all the prerequisites to learn it. Yvon then asked Alan if he had heard of the Blue Moon. Alan replied that he hadn't, and Yvon explained that it was a group that had recently gone viral for hunting down criminal organizations. Since it sounded like they were just taking out the trash, Alan didn't see any reason for it to be an issue. Because the Blue Moon wasn't part of the game's storyline, that Alan knew he believed it would soon fade away. Yvon then dropped a bombshell, stating that the group had even killed nobles. That's why he thought Alan might have heard of them. Alan told Yvon to start sleeping in the room next to his. Meanwhile, the leader of the Blue Moon, Jutia, was asking her members for the weekly report. Solung, the Sin of Pride, reported that she had dealt with the ringleaders of the slave traders first. Before eliminating them, she promised to let them live if they could guess her eye color. But for obvious reasons, they couldn't. This eventually led to her killing everyone. The Sin of Greed Jin then mentioned that all the bodies had been cleanly buried. And as for the illegal experiments, Gadon, the Sin of Obsession, had handled them all. Jutia was thrilled to hear this, as everything seemed to be playing out exactly how she wanted. She praised all of them, saying they existed for the glory of the Blue Moon. Right then, Gaiden mentioned there was a small issue. The head of Avalon, the organization they were targeting, was ruled by Leo, the Count's eldest son. Apparently, Gaiden had discovered a dangerous document while they were wiping out Avalon's southern base. Basically, Leo was planning to take out Alan after their father passed away. When Jutia saw this, she was absolutely livid. 2 years later, Count Palladio, who had fallen ill, passed away. The official report stated that he died of heart failure. But given his history of drug abuse, it was obvious what really killed him. During the funeral, Leo learned that Blue Moon had struck his business again. Alan overheard his brother and his goons talking about Blue Moon and realized that they had finally started taking this organization seriously. Before long, the Count's funeral, which had 0 mourners, came to an end in total silence. After the funeral, Yvonne asked Alan what his next move was. Yvonne reminded him that Leo would inherit the title next year. Surprisingly, Alan told Yvonne that they were moving out of the mansion. This left Yvonne shook, and Alan mentioned they were heading south to a remote village called Gilsmew. It was a secluded village, located in the southern territory of the Palladial estate. Wasting no time, Alan and Yvonne left the mansion. They were having a blast in Gilsmew until they were forced to return to the mansion. Just 3 days later, something shocking and out of the blue happened. The death of the eldest son followed. Alan couldn't believe he was back at the mansion after only 3 days. Alan wondered why the eldest son had died, just 3 days after he left. The cause of death was a single stab wound to the heart. However, the question of who killed him remained unanswered. Later on, Alan asked Yvonne if he had found anything unusual, and right then he said yes. Yvonne asked Alan, "Were you the one who wiped out Avalon in a single night?" This question shocked Alan, and he finally realized why the other nobles and guests were afraid to look him in the eye. On the day Alan planned to go to Gilsmew, Yvonne had asked Alan why he wasn't going to a city, but was heading to a remote village instead. Deep down, Alan knew that the only place he could pull off his plan was in Gilsmew. That was the whole reason he went there. Since he had saved the 5 deadly sins and stopped the world from ending, he believed Gilsmew was the right call, because it had 0 connection to the original plot. Besides, there was a Palladio villa there, a private residence, built far away from the family's main mansion. Basically, it was the perfect spot to live the chill life of a nobleman. The only answer he gave Yvonne was that everything happens for a reason. Yvonne was tired of hearing that and told Alan that he was always brushing things off. But since he couldn't find the right words, he just decided to let it slide. Turns out Leo had planned to kill him. But since Alan left on his own, he decided to put it on hold. Alan even bowed to him, as if he were terrified before leaving. And all of that convinced Leo to let Alan go. However, he decided to tell his assistant, Alman, to shadow Alan's carriage. Alman then asked Leo if he wanted to kill Alan. When he was told to follow the carriage, Alman wanted to confirm if he really intended to kill Alan. Leo was shocked to hear this, because Alman had always been someone who followed every order, without a single complaint. Leo was surprised that Alman would even question him. Leo yelled at Alman, saying his only job was to obey. But Alman suddenly thrust his sword into Leo's chest. Leo was stunned, only able to ask Alman why he was betraying him. Alman smiled, and told Leo that he loved playing games. Alman said he had been acting the whole time, and it turned out he wasn't really Alman, but Gaiden. Gaiden, the sin of obsession, told Leo right before finishing him off that nobody touches their master, the Great Moon. He mentioned that they might be restricted from carrying out missions, but when it comes to the safety of his master, there's simply no debate. Gaiden revealed that he had intentionally waited until Leo voiced his intent to harm Alan before stepping in to take him out. Gaiden said he had been waiting for 2 years, just for Leo to make one wrong move. While bleeding out, Leo told Gaiden that he wouldn't be able to escape his henchman's grasp. Gaiden then countered that after what Leo just said, he had now made the total destruction of Avalon his primary mission. Gaiden shook his head at Leo, stating that the Great Moon, Alan had actually given him a shot at life, but as usual he completely blew it. Alan woke up to a gorgeous morning, in what he considered paradise, since he could sleep in whenever he wanted, eat whenever he felt like it, and just live the chill life of a noble. Alan was vibing so hard that he even thought about starting a toast business. He was right in the middle of feasting on delicacies when Raban stepped into the room, announcing that he had just received a message. Alan's face immediately soured as he read the letter, and found out he was being called back to the estate because his older brother had just passed away. With those few simple words, his so-called paradise came to a screeching halt after only 3 days. In low spirits, he returned to the estate and noticed that everyone was acting really weird around him. This was when Raban asked exactly when he had become a mastermind, capable of wiping out Avalon. Alan finally realized he had fallen into some kind of crazy simulation situation. Alan then asked Raban to break down the situation for him, how on earth he had ended up as the mastermind. Raban simply replied that he was the only one who gained anything from this mess. Raban continued saying that Leo was murdered after they left the manor. That gives you a rock-solid alibi. On top of that, this ultimately put you in the position of the heir, without any rivals left. Yvonne mentioned that since Avalon is gone, there's no one left to mess with you, Alan. Putting all this together, Yvonne said Alan had become the mastermind of the entire county. Yvonne also flexed a bit, saying he's a master swordsman and he's under the command of Alan. Alan was totally bewildered by everything, which led him to ask Yvonne if he was actually enjoying this, since he seemed to be practically dancing around. Alan sat down to process everything that had happened, racking his brain. He couldn't think of any organization strong enough to take down Avalon in a single night. Suddenly, he remembered that Yvonne once told him there was an organization that specialized in hunting others. Alan thought the culprit might be Blue Moon. Yvonne then told Alan that, according to the intel from his guild, there was no sign of Blue Moon being involved. Basically, the Blue Moon organization never leaves bodies behind, but they do leave a mark. On the flip side, the Avalon members were all killed with swords. Alan finally realized why they pinned him as the mastermind. It's because he has an assistant who uses a sword. Since Blue Moon hasn't appeared in the main plot yet, and there's no evidence pointing to them, Alan began to wonder who it could actually be. Later during their usual meeting, Tia asked her teammates if they left any traces of their involvement in what went down, but they assured her there were none. The only thing they left behind were piles of corpses, and they did everything exactly how Tia wanted. Tia smiled, since her plan had worked out perfectly. This basically ended Avalon, the powerful organization that once pulled the strings of the Asteria Kingdom. Tia and her squad only took 5 days to wipe them out. Avalon. Dan then told Tia that the cleanup wasn't finished yet. Tia asked him what he meant, and he explained that he had found even more nobles connected to Avalon. Apparently, the anti-duchy seems to be the culprit, deeply involved in everything. Without skipping a beat, Tia told the group that they were required to quietly eliminate the threat. Tia then checked with her friends about the Information Guild, and they assured her that the guild had zero intel linking them to the entire massacre. Basically, all the other guilds were on the same page as the Information Guild, as they all called it a hellscape created by a master swordsman. Jin then asked Tia if they should keep up the surveillance, and she told them to go for it. Tia told them that it was crucial that their master never find out what was actually going down. Jayos mentioned that Leo Allen's brother was the one who targeted him first. Tia then stated that they couldn't justify what they'd done, since they didn't receive orders from Allen. Tia reminded them that they are a sword, and they aren't allowed to think for themselves. Tia said that Blue Moon only acts on orders given, and furthermore, she warned them that their master knows everything. With that in mind, she urged them to always live up to the standards set by their master, and never let him down. Gaios was surprised that Tia, who is extraordinarily powerful, was actually scared of Alan finding out about their feats. However, Gaios couldn't argue with that, since everything they did was for Alan's sake. A month later, Alan found himself swamped with endless work, and this wasn't the life he had pictured for himself, but rather the life that chose him due to Leo's death. Alan has brought a lot of resentment upon himself. Surprisingly, Leo's death shouldn't have happened for another 6 years. Because of the sudden death of his entire family, the entire workload has fallen onto Alan's shoulders. To make matters worse, everyone is working like crazy and delivering projects right on time. Alan recalled that back in his father's day, they all used to slack off big time. He had no clue that the servants and laborers were busting their tails just to make sure they didn't piss him off and end up dead in a ditch somewhere. Alan wished the servants would just handle things without dragging him into it. Then Gaiden praised Alan for reaching the 2nd tier in his magic training within just 2 years. Gaiden told Alan that he possessed incredible talent, since it usually takes about 4 years of practice to reach the 2nd tier. To avoid an argument with Gaiden, Alan admitted he might have some talent for magic. In reality, Alan was pouring everything he knew into magical defense because he was worried. The technique he was learning also required high-level magic control, but Alan didn't think he'd be any good at it. Initially, Alan was stoked, because he thought once the main plot ended, the danger would be gone, and with it, he could study at his own pace without the stress. However, with the recent security needs, Alan realized his mana circuits were actually tiny. Basically, the mana capacity one is born with is like an athlete's natural build. It's predetermined from birth. And when it comes to Alan's mana capacity, it's quite small, way too small. So small that even all his hard work couldn't make up for it. Alan was reflecting on his stressful life when Raban announced that an invitation to a ball had just arrived. Alan was surprised to be invited to a dance party, but he had no choice but to attend. As soon as he entered the hall, Alan was already complaining about being tired. The party was a regular ball for nobles to socialize, held in the southern region of the Asteria Kingdom. Alan also thought about building connections at the ball, since he would soon become a count. Alan realized that having good relations with other nobles could ensure his security in the future. Alan began to make his move, but all the nobles started dodging him as if he were some kind of plague. Gaiden comforted him, telling him not to be down, but Alan wasn't even upset. Alan had fully expected something like this to happen. Alan told Gaiden that he needed to step out for a bit. Alan headed to the drinks table while thinking about his next move. Even though he was shunned as the black sheep, Alan was prepared to handle the situation, using the social skills he claimed to have secretly practiced. After grabbing a glass of wine, he walked up to a young lady and commented on how good the drinks were. He told the woman that he'd love to buy a few bottles to take home, and he tried to end the conversation with a smile. But just as he'd feared, his smile looked absolutely terrifying. With fear crawling through her body, the girl told Alan that she would have her father arrange it. And before Alan could say another word, she bolted. Alan was left standing there, while the other guests began to whisper about how Alan must have threatened the poor girl, forcing her to flee. In fact, they believed Alan was even worse than his dead brothers. Alan tried to gaslight himself into thinking the girl wasn't terrified of him, and he concluded that she must just be shy. Gaiden stepped up to comfort Alan, and he recounted all the sacrifices he had made to try and make sure everything went smoothly. Finally, he realized that the name Balacio was even more terrifying than he thought. Since rumors claimed he had murdered his own brothers, he had automatically become the person nobody wanted to hang out with. Fed up with the room, Alan told Gaiden that he needed to go outside for some fresh air. Meanwhile, Alan was being watched by a mysterious, red-haired woman. As Alan was reflecting on his trashy life, out on the balcony a strange girl appeared, wanting to talk to him. Alan was shocked that someone actually spoke to him, and on closer look it turned out to be Lodzia, the third daughter of the Duke Anti family. Alan wasn't entirely surprised that someone from this family was talking to him. Alan remembered that the Anti family was one of the major antagonists in the game. Basically, they were the black sheep of the North. Alan realized that anyone choosing to talk to him couldn't possibly be a normal person. However, Alan wondered why he didn't remember this girl, as he didn't recall seeing her when he played the game. Right then, Lodzia cut straight to the chase, telling Alan that she needed his power because she was about to be assassinated. Alan was floored hearing this, and the girl went on to say that until now, she had been protected by her father because she was the daughter of his mistress. However, her father had fallen ill, and she was afraid her sisters would take her out. Finally, Alan realized it was all about survival, and then it clicked. Why he didn't remember her. She had died before the main story of the game even began. Lodzia continued to beg Alan for help, but Alan shot her down, saying he wouldn't help. Lodzia kept talking, saying she wasn't asking for a freebie. Lodzia promised Alan half of the ducal territory if he could assist her. Alan ignored her and said he was leaving. Alan admitted that Lodzia was in a tight spot, but at the same time, he would also be putting himself in danger if he helped her, even if he wanted to help. Alan knew that he couldn't because, contrary to the rumors, he was just a talentless hack. Just as he was about to step through the door, Alan's conscience stopped him, and he turned back to talk to Lodzia. He told her that something good would happen to her, and deep down, he hoped she really would meet someone who could help her. Meanwhile, the Sins were watching. They had noticed Lodzia approaching Alan, and they reasoned that reporting to Jutia was the best course of action before making a move. Jin then told Zeus that they might not need to report the situation, since Lodzia was the only member of the anti-house who wasn't involved in their dirty laundry. This, in turn, excluded her from being a target for Gaiden. Zeus now agreed that this made things easier, as the rest of the anti-house would be dealt with. Jin mentioned that Jutia had ordered them to ensure all information was cut off, to make sure the Avalon incident never reached Alan's ears. Alan was walking alone along the corridor when he was suddenly approached by the red-haired girl. Alan was confused at first, unsure if she was greeting him or someone else. Alan nervously returned the greeting, and from the way she carried herself and her aura, Alan could tell she was someone shady. Alan tried to remember who she was, since he was certain he'd seen her face in the game. Besides, he realized that anyone talking to him was bound to be unusual. Alan finally recalled her name, Kalia Zenonia, and he stepped forward to greet her. Kalia was shocked that Alan actually knew who she was. Alan told the girl he knew her because she was quite famous. Apparently, there were 3 major houses in the Asteria Kingdom. The house in the north was Anti, the house in the east was Palacio, and in the west were the degenerates of House Zenonia. It turned out Kalia was the eldest daughter of Count Zenonia. If Palacio was considered a street gang, then Zenonia was a corporate-style criminal organization. Things were getting more sophisticated, even if it required some noble connections. To live a peaceful life, Alan was worried he shouldn't get mixed up with House Zenonia. Alan kept up the flattery by telling Kalia that she was famous because she's a total 10, and Kalia thanked him for the compliment. Kalia said she wanted to chat some more, and Alan agreed, but mentioned that there were a lot of eyes watching them. Deep down inside, Alan just wanted the girl to let him go his own way. Kalia smiled, saying Alan was exactly like the rumors, but she let him know she wanted to see him again. Alan was taken aback by this, making him wonder what the girl meant by that. Meanwhile, Zeus and Jin were still monitoring the situation, and it looked like something more concerning had popped up. Zeus then told Jin that some weird guy was tailing Alan, since there were no direct orders regarding this. Jin suggested they just keep an eye out, but they'd switch to taking him out if necessary. Later, Alan and Jaban headed to a canyon that Alan was supposedly searching for. Jaban was skeptical about the whole thing, and he tried to tell Alan that it was pitch black inside the canyon, even though it was the middle of the day. On the flip side, Alan was thrilled to have finally found his target. He prayed he was in the right spot, because he'd probably fall into a deep depression. If it turned out to be the wrong place, as he stepped inside, Alan felt relieved to see it was exactly what he was looking for. Basically, it was a piece of cake to find in the game, unlike the struggle he just went through, just to figure out its location. Alan seemingly came to the canyon for a certain maze, the Maze of Whispers. If he could solve the puzzles in the 8 rooms, he'd have a chance to score a legendary treasure as a reward. Since he still remembered the whole walkthrough, he believed it was time for some fun, grinding level 1. Alan was overwhelmed standing at the entrance of the maze, since this was his first time. He was seeing it in real life. Raban then mentioned that the canyon seemed to be man-made, making him wonder how Alan even knew about this place. Alan casually said he comes here often, and this left Jaban shook. Realizing Jaban was overthinking it, Alan told him he was just kidding. As they entered the maze, they encountered some monsters hanging from the ceiling, waiting for them to mess up a puzzle so they could crush them. While Jaban was panicking, Alan stayed cool as a cucumber, which shocked Jaban. Alan focused solely on the puzzle, while Jaban was racking his brain, thinking about how he had failed many times trying to understand. Jaban reflected deeply on it, and he realized that none of the missions they had ever undertaken were actually related to each other. From taking down an evil organization to rescuing a slave, repaying someone's debt, to helping an orphan, and many other things like that. This made Raban wonder how Alan knew about the maze, when Alan hadn't even left the mansion. Just then Alan said he had solved the puzzle correctly, but they needed to wait for the giant hand to finish its thing. Even though Raban was curious about Alan, he knew that something good always came out of every mission they went through. The door began to open, leaving Raban wondering what exactly Alan was planning this time. When the door finally swung open, they came across countless treasures lying in the grand chamber. Standing in the distance was a gauntlet set with rings. It seemed their only objective was the black ring on one of the fingers. Raban was surprised to see this was their only goal, since it looked totally useless. He took the ring and realized it was way too big for his hand, but he took it anyway. He told Raban to ditch the treasures he had packed up, because they would only bring nothing but trouble for them. As they left the maze, Alan reassured Jaban that there was nothing dangerous on the way out. Alan was grateful for the walkthrough, since it had made everything so easy for him. A moment later, they ran into a bit of trouble. A pack of stone golems blocked their path, and Jaban was thinking of a way to get Alan out of there. Right then, Alan told him he had nothing to worry about, because he was going to handle the golems himself. Jaban tried to tell Alan that escaping was their top priority. Regardless of whatever he was planning, Alan walked toward the golems, while holding up his ring finger. Jaban was worried that Alan was on a suicide mission, since his Tier 2 magic was useless against the golems. Once he was close enough to the golems, Alan used the ring to activate the binding vow. Time stood still, and Alan found himself in an empty dimension, where the system informed him that he had 2 vows he could enact. Alan remembered that in the game, there would be a selection window at his current spot. Staring into the abyss was a giant face, and Alan believed the reward for clearing the maze was the binding vow. Just like the name suggests, it was an absorption-type treasure that imposed restrictions on the user in exchange for power. The voice that just spoke to Alan made everything feel very real. Alan then stated his first vow. After reciting the incantation, the creature asked him what he intended to achieve, and Alan said he wanted to bend the rules of the world just a little bit more. Once he had made his request, the system approved his first binding vow, and for the second vow, he followed the same process. and the system asked what he sought through this. Alan simply replied that his request remained the same as before. The entity took a minute before answering Alan, and Alan feared he had messed everything up. Alan knew that selecting both seals and incantations for the vow would yield the highest magic attack power. Back when he played the game, he had mastered all the hand seals and spells, meaning his request should have been approved. Just then, the entity granted his request, and the voice said he was considered very important for remembering everything related to the Forgotten God. The voice then told him to carry on the Forgotten God's will, leaving Alan confused after the entity finished speaking. The ring on Alan's hand was absorbed, which was the sign that the vow had been successfully activated. At that moment, Alan returned to the real world, just as Jaban was trying to pull him out of the golem's path. However, Alan used his magic power, but even after using all his mana, the lightning ball he created was still tiny. Because his own magic stats were trash, he decided to test the power of the binding vow by paying the price it demanded, leaving Jaban absolutely terrified. With just a snap of his fingers, Alan launched a magic light orb into the middle of the 7 golems, and the moment the attack hit, they all shattered into tiny pieces. As usual, Alan kept his casual deadpan expression, while Jaban was completely floored by what he had just witnessed. Once the golems were cleared out, they began making their way out of the cave, and Jaban asked Alan if he had been hiding his true strength all this time, but Alan said no. Jaban argued that in all his long years working as a mercenary, he had never witnessed anything like what had just happened, but Alan insisted it was nothing more than Tier 2 magic. Deep down, Alan was actually low-key panicking because he didn't remember that spell being that op when used in the game. Alan recalled that in the game, a spell could be buffed by using chant segments, and what he just did was quintuple the effectiveness compared to normal. With the number of chants he used this way, he had obtained something else entirely, much greater power on a higher level. Even Alan was shocked by the magic's destructive force, even though it was only Tier 2 magic. After navigating the cave for a few minutes, they finally made it outside, and Jaban sighed in relief since they had escaped. Jaban slumped down while complaining about how exhausting the current mission was compared to actual combat. Jaban turned to Alan, asking who would design such a terrifying place. And this was when Alan realized this maze actually had another name. Going around in the community, it was known as the Maze of Whispers, and it had caught everyone's attention. Alan took the chance to tell Jaban that it was created by a guy named Paleon. When Alan realized Jaban was about to ask more about the maze, he pulled him up, saying it was time for them to head out. Alan told Jaban there was still work for him to do after they got back, and his work ethic really impressed Jaban. Speaking of magic, Alan knew that a hand sign matching the magic's element would increase its effectiveness, and this was a basic rule in the game. However, things were a bit different in real life. Since the visual effects remained, while the attack stats increased, the hand seal fundamentally changed the spell itself, and Alan began to wonder if his mana control had become so cracked that he could perceive the shift in how things worked, or not. Unsure about this, he decided he would have to test his theory once his mana recharged. Anyway, he was still glad things turned out pretty well. Alan and Jaban had no idea they were being watched by one of the sinners. The girl found her way into the maze to study the inscriptions on the walls, and she could clearly see just how powerful Alan seemed to be. She was blown away by everything she saw, since Alan seemed to know everything, and even acted according to what she knew. She was shook believing that Alan was actually the one named Paleon. Moreover, she was even more hyped by the fact that the spell Alan used wasn't recorded in any ancient library books. All these things combined made her reverence for Alan reach a new high, and finally she concluded that everything Dutia said was the real deal. Right then Gios joined her, and she asked if he secured the intel he had been searching for, but he said no, stating his target was flatlined before he could get what he needed from him. She was a bit bummed about this, and said they'd have to report back to Dutia for further orders. As their job in the area was done, both flew off like mages. Meanwhile, at Count Zenonia's manor, Kalia couldn't stop yapping about Alan ever since meeting him at the ball. Clearly, something sus was going down in the Count's house. Everyone believed Kalia's father was in charge, but they didn't know that. He was just a puppet for his daughter. The one actually running the show in this house is none other than Kalia herself, while her father is merely a puppet. However, her conversation with Alan left her suspecting that the guy had already caught on to her. She was still mulling this over when one of the servants rushed over, saying she needed to get to her room immediately. She hurried back only to find her spy lying dead right in her chamber. Nonetheless, she didn't feel the need to panic, because the seal she had placed on him hadn't been triggered, meaning he hadn't spilled any beans before he died. Even so, Kalia could see that the corpse had been deliberately planted in her room. This made her even more anxious about how exactly she had been exposed. As far as Kalia was concerned, she believed Aelin was the one responsible, and she assumed Alan had figured everything out during their chat. She had no idea that Alan was just a regular guy, dozing off in his carriage, completely clueless about world politics. On the other hand, Lozia was on her way home, and she was totally stressed out because her meeting with Alan didn't go as planned. From the brief time she spent with Aelin, she could tell he wasn't someone you'd want as an enemy. And even though Alan was her last resort, she knew he wouldn't agree to a deal that didn't benefit him. Lozia had basically been stripped of her power by her own siblings, from the eldest son Kamalian, the eldest daughter Azian, the second daughter Falai to the second son Kyger. Lozia arrived at the family mansion and thought about how she'd managed to survive this long thanks to her father's influence. Now that her father was gone, she had to face the question of what to do next. As soon as she stepped inside, two maids ran toward her with faces full of anxiety and called out her name. The maids told her that her siblings, Kyger and Feline, had checked out early. This news shocked Lozia to her very core. She didn't want to believe that ruthless people like Kyger and Feline would voluntarily delete themselves. Lozia then asked the maids about Tamalian and Mazian, but she got her answer when they entered the room and found their bodies hanging. Lozia was completely shook as she stared at the bodies of her siblings. And while all this chaos was unfolding, one of the sinners was seen leaving the area with a smirk on his face after a successful mission. The entire mansion was in shambles because no one understood what the hell was going on. Suddenly, Lozia recalled what Aelin had told her at the end of their meeting. He had told her that good fortune would find its way to her. Because of this, Lozia immediately jumped to the conclusion that Alan was the mastermind behind everything that had happened. With the sudden deaths of her siblings, Lozia suddenly became the sole heir to the Grand Duchy of Anti. Though she should have been happy or relieved, Lozia collapsed in horror, as she believed she had made a deal with the devil. Regardless, she came to a bold conclusion, that there was no turning back, since she had seen firsthand what happens to those who betray Alan. Lozia toughened up, telling herself she just had to keep pushing forward, on the path she had chosen. 2 months later, Aelin was in his office, when a servant appeared with a gift, apparently from the Grand Duchy of Anti. Aelin opened the box, and he was floored to see a bottle of fine wine. Ivan told him that this wine was quite special, as each bottle costs several thousand gold. That's why it's so rare. Accompanying the wine was a handwritten letter from Lozia Anti herself. Alan was surprised to see this, and began to wonder why Lozia would send him such an expensive gift. He couldn't help but ask the servant to see if the gift was actually meant for him, since he saw no reason why Lozia would want to honor him. The servant assured Alan that the gift was indeed for him, as Lozia had personally prepared it for him, and had ordered it to be hand-delivered. The moment the servant referred to Lozia as the Duchess, Alan suddenly realized something was up. This was when he realized that the youngest child of the house, Lozia, had somehow become the Duchess of Anti. At the Anti estate, Lozia was trying to settle into her new position. As the Duchess, she found herself sitting in the Duke's office, a place that was off-limits to her in the past. Even though the whole scenario surrounding her siblings' deaths was extremely fishy, she dodged all forms of suspicion because she had a rock-solid alibi: the ball. Despite the fact that her secret organization had been wiped out by her siblings, and by the time she returned to the mansion, she was basically a nobody. Everything had changed for her, thanks to Alan's presumed intervention. This made Lozia wonder just how far ahead Alan was calculating. As it turned out, she had unified all the organizations under the anti-banner, but she wasn't naive enough to think she could ever go toe-to-toe with Alan's overwhelming power. Because of this, Lozia figured Alan still wanted something else from her, and she believed it was Anti's underworld network. Despite reaching these conclusions, she believed she just needed to focus on what was right in front of her for the time being. With a beaming smile on her face, she wondered if Alan would like the bottle of wine she had sent him. Back at Alan's office, he was freaking out because he couldn't believe Lozia was now the Duchess, even though she had been targeted just a few months ago. Without anyone saying a word, Alan could also tell that something bizarre was going on. A few months later, meaning 5 years before the story officially begins, Jaban addressed him by the title of Earl. This caught Alan off guard, and Jaban reminded him that New Year's was just around the corner, and his succession to become the Earl was imminent. Alan was totally floored, because he had never envisioned himself as an Earl in the game plan he had mapped out for himself. However, he couldn't deny the fact that he was low-key enjoying the perks that came with being a noble. Raban then handed him a letter from Judea, and Alan asked Raban if he had gathered any intel on the assassins who had sent Leo to meet his makers, but he said no. However, he assured him that the Information Guild was still on it. Eber asked Ellen why he was so invested in the whole investigation, wanting to know if he was interested because he wanted revenge. Alan then replied that he just wanted to be prepared for whatever might go down. After Eber finished teasing him about the Earl title, Alan opened the letter from Judia, and it was the same as usual. Even so, Alan still cherished the monthly letters, as they brought a little warmth to his cold lifestyle. Ellen smiled like a proud dad, even though he had never actually met any of the kids before. Ellen then asked Jaban how old the children were, and he let him know they were almost at the age to enter society. In fact, some of the other kids at the orphanage with them had already left earlier. After getting this key info from Jaban, Alan realized that maybe it was finally time for him to let the 5 children go their own ways. Jaban was surprised Alan was willing to let them go, but Alan told him they were all grown up now, so it was time for them to think about their own futures. Alan believed the 5 children were past the age where they would awaken as great sins and could finally integrate into society. Clearly, every great sin has its own narrative, revealing their expertise. Judia has a talent for faith. Geos has a talent for swordsmanship. Jai has a talent for research. Seolang has a talent for combat. And Raiden is exceptional in leadership. Ellen is dead certain they will shine, if he can just put them in the right roles and environments. So Alan decided to give each of them a gift. That had been his plan from the very start. After arranging all the necessary details, he sent private letters to them via Jaban. Not long after that, Judia received the letters, and she told her teammates that they had received a new directive from the higher-up. She told them this directive was extra special, because it was addressed individually to each person. The 5 of them were stoked to get their letters, and they started cheering like they had just hit the jackpot. However, before opening them, Judia suggested they reread the old letters first, as Alan's instructions were always top tier. The others were surprised and impressed to hear this, since previously Judia was the only one allowed to read the letters. Judia believed they all had the right to read them now, since they had received individual instructions. Judia opened one of the letters to show them, and it contained nothing but basic greetings. The other kids were confused because it sounded so ordinary, but Judia quickly jumped in, telling them that Alan had told them from the start to disguise the letters as casual conversations. Judia then showed them what she claimed to be the first directive following the initial greetings. In the letter, Alan mentioned how his second older brother had used him as a footstool, and Judia told them that this was nothing less than a hit order issued to them. She also pointed to the part where Alan seemed to have entrusted her with the Blue Moon organization. Judia then told her teammates that they had to read the letters the way she did to correctly interpret the directives and carry out the mission effectively. Geos then cut in, asking if it wouldn't be better to visit Alan in person if they were trying to avoid any info leaks. Judia then replied with a stern face and voice, telling Geos that their job was simply to comply. This sent a shiver down Geos' spine, and he replied that he was fully aware of what was at stake. Since they had settled that, Judia suggested they read the new directives. Upon opening his letter, Geos realized he was being sent to Caliban, the land of the Jinn Knights. On the other hand, Seolang was ordered to go to Colony, which is basically a desert. The other 2 also checked their letters, and they were being sent to Rajas and Latania, while Judia was ordered to the Holy Kingdom of Rosario. Inside the letters, there were also instructions on what they had to do. Geos was surprised to be told to become a knight, as he saw no reason for it. Even so, Ellen assured them that he would continue to fund them. In addition, Alan even included the location of a gift in the letter. Before they disbanded, Judia reminded them that mentioning Blue Moon was strictly forbidden, unless Alan himself brought it up first. Each of them followed their instructions. They sorted out their business and departed for their assigned locations. 3 months later, Alan was still researching world magic, and he still hadn't found what he was looking for. Standing at a crossroads, he decided he had to experiment on his own body. Alan then thought back to the assassins, and he asked Jaban about them, but Jaban let him know there was still no progress. Deep down, Alan realized that everything happening was a butterfly effect from the actions he had taken, and it had somewhat spiraled out of control. A clear example of this is Lozia. She should have been dead, but she suddenly became the Duchess of Antia, where she's building up a terrifying force in the underworld. Alan then told Jaban that they didn't need to investigate the assassination anymore. Jaban was surprised to hear this, but Alan realized that it would be better if the whole thing remained a mystery. He didn't want to dig into anything that deviated from the mission, as he was trying to dodge any disastrous fallout. He knew for a fact that secret organizations wouldn't meddle unless something actually messed with them, and he didn't want to poke a hornet's nest. Eberton followed his master's orders and assured him he would stop the investigation. However, he let him know that Yeos R had been knighted in Caliban. Alon took the news with great joy, as it was something worth celebrating. Nearly 3 months after that, Eber informed Alon that Jeos R had founded a knightly order. This shocked Alon, because forming a knightly order meant Jeos R was at expert level or higher, even though he had only recently been knighted. Eber agreed with Alon, saying that Jeos R was truly a top-tier talent, especially since Caliban is notoriously strict when it comes to their knight titles. 6 months after that, which was 1 year after the 5 great sins went independent, Ellen had fully settled into his role as Earl. Ellen was in his office when Ebern walked in, and as usual, he had some news for him. Ebern revealed that Jeos had now become one of the 5 swords of Caliban, a master knight. This news sent a chill down Alon's spine, causing him to drop the book he was holding. Sweat poured down his face as he asked. Alon checked to see if he heard that right. That's because only a sword grandmaster can become a master knight. In the game, a sword grandmaster is a powerhouse who has moved beyond just basic sword aura, awakening a unique ability known as derivative. Alon then asked Eber whether Jeos is officially a sword grandmaster now, but Eber said it's still up in the air, since he hasn't manifested a derivative yet. However, the country still granted him the Master Knight title because he took down the 4th sword. Plus, Caliban had lost a Master Knight to the Northern Barbarians, since they've been at war for over a decade. Ebern mentioned it takes at least 15 years just to grasp and wield mana, and a derivative can take decades. Jin the First Sword became the youngest Master Knight at 32. Alon could vouch for just how cracked Jin was, but even with that kind of power, it took him over 25 years to reach his peak. Yet Alon was floored by the fact that Jeos has already hit Master Knight level in just a single year, even though he started out knowing absolutely zero about swordsmanship. Since the derivative is the only thing missing, Alon believes Jeos has the potential to even surpass Jin as a sword grandmaster. Suddenly, Alon began thinking about the perks he could get from raising these kids the right way. But he quickly brushed the thought aside. He realized he should just be grateful that the 5 kids didn't awaken as the 5 great sins and bring destruction to the kingdom. Ellen finally came to a quick conclusion that the kids living well was the main thing he needed to focus on. Meanwhile, in the heart of Koram, the capital of Caliban, there was an elite noble residential area where the knightly order resided. Standing by the window and taking in the breathtaking view of the city is Jeos R, who is currently the captain of the Eclipse Knight Order and the youngest Master Knight. Jeos cracked a gentle smile as his sister waved to him from outside the building. Jeos R thought back on how it all went down until that very moment. He remembered losing everything to the bad guys, known as the Black Men. Because of this, he was consumed by rage and hatred. He found himself locked up, and even though Aelin saved him, he didn't think this was reason enough to be loyal to him. His loyalty was only to the promise of taking revenge for all that was lost. And thus, he became a member of the Blue Moon. Jeos R began working as an agent, taking on high-stakes missions, without a single thought for his own safety. For years, he carried out tasks that brought him one step closer to the Black Men. After years of service, he finally received his first personal directive, and inside the letter was an instruction saying that there was a gift at a small inn in southern Caliban. Even though Jeos R was never one to get hyped about gifts, he still decided to check it out. Jeos R walked into the inn, and his eyes lit up in pure shock at what he saw. Inside the gift Alon had prepared for him was the very family he thought he'd lost forever. It was his little sister standing in the inn, and Jeos R rushed to give her a massive hug. With tears streaming down his cheeks, Jeos R had truly believed his sister, Chili, was dead, but there she was standing right in front of him. Jeos R asked Chili what had happened after they were separated, and she explained that she had been captured by the bad guys, held in solitary confinement while waiting for her turn to be executed. During that process, the little girl managed to escape, but was later recaptured and sold to slave traders. As fate would have it, Ellen appeared and rescued her, and since then, she has been enjoying Alan's tender care. Sally showed her brother a letter Alan sent her, ensuring her safety and even staking his family's honor as a guarantee. Sally told her brother she was deeply grateful for everything Alan had done. When Jeos saw this, he was absolutely floored because Alan didn't just protect his sister, but put his entire family's honor on the line for her. Jeos was stunned and couldn't believe how Alan knew about his family when he had never breathed a word to him. Even Judia didn't know the full details of what happened, yet Alan had managed to take care of everything. This convinced Jaos that Alan truly knows everything, and it was in this very moment that Jaos finally decided to pledge his absolute loyalty to Alan. Now with his sister standing right before him, Jaos felt blessed that Alan overlooked his stupidity for daring to doubt his supreme power. Jaos's only goal used to be revenge, but the gift of his sister was second to none, and because of this, he became more than just a practical zealot. He made it his mission to repay Alan's kindness by reaching the highest rank in Caliban and becoming a master knight, so he could form an elite bodyguard unit made up of the best swordsmen, and that dream was about to come true. Jaos is now determined to face any hardship, until the day he can settle his debt of gratitude to Alan. Until then, Jaos is ready to prove himself far beyond anything expected of him. As part of his efforts, he and the knights, the Eclipse Knights, soon depart on an expedition to fight against the barbarians. Meanwhile, Elan is feeling a sense of peace, believing it's because the kids have all grown up. At the same time, Elan has been pouring himself into his research ever since returning from the labyrinth. At this point, he has reached a final conclusion regarding his current research results. Based on his notes, he realized that refraction magnifies the imperfections of a completed spell, thereby expanding its area of effect. On the other hand, repulsion will crush the shape of whatever is fired, causing the projectile to shift just like that. Alan has gathered all the variables for the type of magic he's currently studying. He also realized that he can only use magic once per day. This is due to his small mana core, however. Alan concluded that magic is pretty cool, even though he initially thought it was only for self-defense. After researching for the past 2 months, he finally decided to test the results. Alan composed himself, and he began chanting the necessary spells in the sequence he had analyzed, from fixation to compression, then collapse. He was able to create an offensive spell that was brilliantly powerful and looked absolutely terrifying. Ellen was overwhelmed by how well everything went, realizing at last that the order of the phrases is actually quite crucial. While he was still staring at the magnificent creation in front of him, he heard an unfamiliar voice behind his back, expressing sheer amazement. Alan turned around and saw Kalia with her mage by her side, both of them looking horrified at what was unfolding before their eyes, something they called original magic. Ellen was shocked to see Kalia standing behind him, making him wonder why this lady was even here. The mage accompanying her screamed in terror, because original magic is something only a 7th circle mage could possibly use or even achieve. When Alan heard this, he was puzzled and started wondering if a low-level trash mage like himself was actually being seen as a 7th circle mage. Later, Kalia and her mage sat at the parlor waiting. Ellen appeared, and Kalia looked completely shook after what she had witnessed a few minutes ago. The reason she came to Alan's domain in the first place was to size up the scope of Alan's knowledge. She also wanted to know the power of the organization backing Ellen. However, what she and her mage found out was on a whole different level. Kalia couldn't believe that her own mage, Bianco, an arrogant 5th circle mage, was actually terrified by what he saw while observing Elan. To put it simply, Bianco had been exiled from the mage tower for inhumane experiments, and he's strong enough to wipe out entire battalions without breaking a sweat. But that same man was now trembling with fear in Elan's presence. Kalia wondered if what she just saw was truly original magic, just as they suspected. A moment later, Ellen walked into the room and asked them why they had come to his mansion. Kalia quickly apologized for dropping by unannounced. She also apologized for accidentally bumping into him while he was working, saying she was just looking for him around the mansion. Ellen reassured her, saying he wouldn't hold what happened against her. However, Elan told Bianco and Kalia that the magic they saw him using wasn't original magic. He told them he was just a 2nd circle mage, incapable of using original magic. Elan turned to Bianco, saying he was pretty sure that he had sensed the truth, that the magic he used has no practical function. Essentially, it's a type of useless magic for both defense and offense. With a stern voice and an overwhelming aura, Elan told the two of them that they must keep what they saw a secret. Bianco quickly cut in, assuring Elan that he didn't see anything clearly. Kalia was shocked to see this, because she couldn't believe someone as arrogant as Bianco would use such formal honorifics when speaking to Ellen. Elan was glad they cleared up the misunderstanding, and he asked why they came to see him. Kalia then revealed they were just in the neighborhood and thought it would be nice to drop by and say hi. This meant they had no important business to discuss with Elan. Ellen was a bit bummed to hear this, and he let them know he had a ton of stuff to deal with, so he didn't have time to sit around and play games with them. Kalia stood up to thank Elan for his brief time with them, and told Elan that she and Bianco would take their leave now. Just as they were about to head out, Ellen told Kalia she should consider visiting Lozia if she was looking for a friend to talk to. Ellen let Kalia know that they'd likely vibe well together. Even though Kalia was skeptical, she still assured Ellen that she would look into his suggestion. After the short talk, Kalia and Bianco headed out. And as they left, when Abel turned around, he asked Elan why that trash clan came to see them. Ellen replied that he really didn't know what House Sinonia wanted from them. Ellen was worried that everything would definitely go south if rumors of him using original magic went viral. He'd likely have power-hungry creeps chasing him down, because after all, this is a fantasy world. At the same time, Ellen didn't think Kalia would visit Lozia, since they were bitter rivals in the underworld. As they rode their horses away from the mansion, Kalia turned to Bianco to ask him if Elan's magic was truly original magic. Bianco then replied that it wasn't original magic. He explained that original magic is a type of magic that carves its own laws into the field of principles. Overall, it is an opportunity and privilege, granted only to supreme archmages, but Ellen's magic is something else entirely. Bianco revealed that he had activated his observational eye to see Elan's magic. The magic field was essentially torn apart, and Elan was distorting the very principles. He collapsed the laws of nature, yet could still manifest the spell. It was a miracle that defied all logic and reason. With a terrified expression, Bianco revealed that behind Elan's magic lies the power and the handiwork of a great forgotten god. Just thinking about it made Bianco's mind go numb, and he told Kalia that he used to be praised for pursuing ancient knowledge known as the magic of the Forgotten Era. Because of what he knew and what he had just seen, Bianco told Kalia in absolute horror that she should never even think about crossing Elan or ever making an enemy out of him. After hearing this, Kalia concluded that she had no business poking around into Elan's affairs and decided that visiting Lozia might be her best bet, since she was nothing more than a pawn in Elan's hands. 5 months passed, which was 2 years after the children became independent. Ellen asked Iburn if there were any updates on the 5 kids. Iburn let him know that there was no news on the 5 of them, but there was some major news he needed to hear. It turned out that Count Sino, Nia, and Duke Antia had formed an alliance, and this news leaves Alan completely shook. He doesn't want to believe that 2 main pillars of the underworld have teamed up. He holds his head in despair, thinking he'd escaped a disaster from the 5 great sins, only for the world to face doom, thanks to this underworld alliance. Finally, his thick head realizes that Kalia must have actually followed his advice from the other day. Realizing he might have started some real trouble, Alan tries to cope by telling himself that the alliance between those 2 is bound to fail, because their personalities are total opposites. However, he realizes he needs to prepare just in case. Alan then sits down to write a letter to Kalia, trying to play nice with her, just in case things go south. He sends Iburn to deliver the message personally, and Iburn assures him he will follow the instructions, while also promising to keep tracking down the children's whereabouts. After Iburn leaves, Alan starts wondering what Jason and Xiaolong are up to, since they're the only ones out of the 5 who haven't checked in. Alan worries that Xiaolong might have kicked the bucket, but at the same time, he believes she should have reached the level of a warrior if she found the gift he left for her. Specifically, he left behind a set of armor from the Golden Lion tribe's sacred beast. When worn, gives a 20% chance for a critical hit. Alan is confident Xiaolong will be fine, because he even left her some financial backing, and the land where he sent her is a place where power is won through pure strength. Meanwhile, in the desert nation colony, Xiaolong is actually living her best life. She found the armor, left for her as a gift, and she is beyond grateful for it. Everything she heard as a kid about the Golden Lion tribe seems to be the real deal. She had heard about the family heirloom, something passed down through hundreds of years, which grants strength and divine power. Xiaolong had obtained the treasure and faced every trial and challenged the heirloom threw at her. Even though it was incredibly tough, she was able to tackle every obstacle head-on because she could remember being saved by Alan's grace. By saving her when she was just a lab rat, Alan had given her the strength to take revenge on Black Dragon, the one who wiped out her parents. Because of this, Xiaolong realized that Alan's wish was for her to become the greatest gladiator alive. Furthermore, she was expected to gather the scattered Golden Lion tribe and restore its glory using the power she had been gifted. Hyped about everything she had gone through, Xiaolong was finally ready to do whatever it takes for Alan, her savior, and for the Beastmen, while ensuring she would take down her arch-nemesis Black Dragon. Later, Jaban told Alan that he had some intel on Xiaolong. Apparently, She had been dubbed the Golden Flash because of her performance in the arena. Alan was pleased to hear that Xiaolong was doing well. Alan then asked about Jason, but Jaban said there was only a little bit of info on him, though they weren't entirely sure if it was reliable. Suddenly, Alan turned to Jaban and asked why he was being so lazy when he should be busy. Jaban was confused to hear this, because basically, he had finished everything Alan had ordered him to do. Alan then cut in, saying they needed to get ready soon, because it takes about a month just to reach the magic tower. But this was news to Jaban. Alan played dumb, asking Jaban if he'd forgotten to mention it. Jaban didn't even bother arguing with his master, since he was already used to the way he worked. Jaban then mentions that it only takes a few weeks to reach the Green Magic Tower, but Alan corrects him, saying they are heading to the Blue Magic Tower. Apparently, the Blue Magic Tower is located near the Labyrinth City, and since it's quite a haul, Jaban decides to start packing their things. Alan flops down on the sofa, thinking about the grueling carriage ride he's about to go through. Still, he has no other choice, because the item needed to boost his pathetic mana pool is kept at the Blue Magic Tower. Alan can vouch that the Labyrinth City is full of memories, since he grinded the game so much back then. Apparently, the labyrinth at the city center is considered endless, but the deeper players go, the better the loot they get. Even though thousands of players have dedicated their lives to the maze, no one has ever reached the very end. The chat logs were always popping off, with players complaining about how they tried to reach the bottom of the labyrinth with no luck. Just like in the game, holy relics and ancient artifacts are discovered there. That is exactly why certified magic appraisers are stationed in the city. This then reminds Alan of Jin, who mentioned she'd be taking the appraiser exam soon. Alan is confident that with her talent, she'll breeze through the test. At the same time, he worries the gift he left for Jin was too mid, since it was just a basic gear appraisal tool. However, he's ready to provide more backup if that gift isn't enough. Speaking of Latania, the Labyrinth City, it's a lawless city, run by mercenaries and adventurers. No one officially rules it. Tucked away in the city is a secret appraisal shop, called Mez because of its top-tier service. Most of its clients are high-ranking nobles and A-rank adventurers. Among those nobles was even the city lord himself. He was seen in the shop getting something appraised, which appeared to be a fire-starting device. And the person assisting him was Jin. Jin was wearing a strange device on her face, and with it, she could tell the Lord everything he needed to know about that gadget. The Lord was pleased with her input as usual, and he gave her props for it. After the Lord left, Jin took off the device and looked around the shop. Since she was finally alone, she narrated that the shop's fame was all thanks to the special service it provided. It was a gift intended for Alan. Apparently in the letter he sent her back then, he told her to become an appraiser, but at first she didn't get it. She knew that everything they were doing was to take down the bad guys, but she never saw any reason why she specifically needed to be an appraiser. That was her belief, until she found the gift that Alan had left for her. The relic given to her was known as the Eye of the Tail, a holy relic that quickly identifies items below a certain mana threshold to assist in appraisal. Jin was completely shook because what she saw was a whole different vibe from what appeared in the books stored in the library. After removing the seals, the inscriptions came to life, and she realized that to defeat the villains, she had to upgrade the relic. She saw it as a calling and a means to dedicate herself, and since then she has been working with this relic. With the time she invested in the device, Jin finally realized that Alan had given her a job that only she could do. And she believed everything she was doing was aimed at eliminating the Black Wolf. 3 weeks later, Alan and Jaban arrived at the Blue Tower and met the Vice Tower Master, who told them that the Tower Master was currently away. The Vice Tower Master Bestra Celine, telling them to state their business and get the hell out of the tower. As soon as Alan sees her, he remembers her from the game. Apparently she is a genius mage, who reached the 8th circle, and even became the Tower Master in her early 20s. It is well known that the Magic Tower possesses immense military power, and it holds a monopoly on specific necessities, which gives it a status equal to that of the nobility. The authority of a Vice Tower Master transcends humanity, approaching the level of a deity. But no matter how intimidating things seem, Alan casually introduces himself. Alan tells Bestra that he's here for the Time Rift because he can get rid of it. A Time Rift is a crack, leading to an unknown subdimension that forms in places with high magic usage, creating anomalies that cause massive damage. As soon as Alan states his goal, Bestra scans his stats with her observation eye, and she's let down by what she sees. She immediately tells Alan to kick rocks, which leaves him stunned. Alan tries to argue, but Bestra loses her cool, saying a ton of people have come to tell her the same thing. Alan refuses to back down, telling Bestra to just take him to the rift. Bestra remains defensive, assuming that Alan is just clout-chasing to salvage his tarnished reputation. Bestra gets even more heated, unleashing a mana pressure that makes her look more terrifying than before. Alan cringes in fear, but he remembers he's desperate and cannot give up now. Alan steps forward, telling Bestra that he will hand over his entire fortune if he fails to clear the time rift. Bestra thinks Alan is still capping, so Alan tells her he's down to make a mana oath, if that's what she wants. Alan points out that this isn't a bad deal, just in exchange for a little bit of her time, and after giving it some thought, she agreed. Bestra then leads Alan to the room containing the rift, and she reminds him that his entire fortune will be hers if he fails to clear it. Alan smiles, assuring Bestra that such a thing will never happen. Deep down, Bestra wonders if Alan is just plain stupid or incredibly brave, but she's dead set on him being a fool. When it comes to time rifts, there usually hasn't been a reason to close them before, since they spit out artifacts and naturally vanish after 3 months. Because of this, research on time rifts had stalled, and no mage has ever closed one manually. However, the Blue Magic Tower has been struggling with a time rift inside their building for over 2 years. Now standing before the time rift, Alan takes a moment to observe it, and Bestra scoffs at him, suggesting he leave since he can't do anything about it anyway. Just then, Bestra notices Alan is using his hand. This is a method that uses the hand as a medium. Bestra recalls that ancient magic books mention this technique, and it's supposedly nothing but a myth. Bestra believes Alan is just putting on a show, and she mocks him, telling him to stop playing around. Suddenly, everything goes blank, and Bestra realizes that everything has stopped moving. She immediately activates her observation eye, and that's when she sees it. A massive red rift standing right in front of Alan. And as a talented mage, she can feel the overwhelming power before her. Before she even knows it, she finds herself being affected by an even greater power, staring right into her eyes. The overwhelming entity approaches and makes its demands known to her, and as sweat rolled down her face, she agreed to those demands. When everything returned to normal, the time rift had closed, and Alan was standing at a distance acting cool, as always. In his hand was the holy relic he had come for, and he was satisfied that everything went off without a hitch. He turned to Bestra to say he'd be taking the relic, but instead of her usual mean-spirited attitude, Bestra seemed completely submissive. She told Alan that he was free to do whatever he wanted, and she promised not to tell a soul about it. Alan was confused, assuming his lie hadn't worked on her. Alan then walked toward her, but she quickly backed away while assuring Alan that she could keep a secret. Alan was surprised to see the girl acting so weird, but he brushed her off and told Giaban that it was time for them to bounce. Suddenly, Bestra stopped him, saying she had a mana recovery potion for him, and it was handmade by her. Alan was shook by the fact that he was receiving a potion crafted by the Vice Tower Master herself. While Alan was still checking out the potion, Bestra stepped closer and asked if he liked it. This made Alan even more confused, because he didn't want to believe Bestra was doing all this out of gratitude for him helping close the portal. Bestra continued her bizarre behavior when she told Alan that she would make sure to follow the requests Alan had made. In fact, he was ready to take a mana oath if it would make Alan trust her. Before Alan could tell her she was tripping, Bestra had already triggered the oath process, and while swearing, she vowed to keep everything on the down low. Just like that, Alan finished his business at the Blue Magic Tower, securing the holy relic he wanted, along with 5 potions and an oath. As they left the tower, Giaban stared at the holy relic, which was nothing more than a bracelet, and he asked Alan if this was really all the young master came here for. Even though it didn't look like much, Alan assured Giaban that he truly needed this bracelet. It's known as the Sigil of the Impure, and it has a gem embedded in it that can absorb and store mana from the atmosphere. Alan was hyped that the device worked perfectly, and even though the storage capacity wasn't huge, it was more than enough to fix his mana pit. Alan believed it was enough for him, since his goals were magic research and self-defense, not jumping into fights. Suddenly he realized that the way Bestra acted toward him before leaving the tower was pretty sus. The level of respect she showed him back then made Alan wonder if Bestra was just trolling him. Alan recalled that the last time Kalia met him it was exactly like that. However, he didn't think he had anything to worry about, because he was convinced that he'd never run into any of them again. Meanwhile, in Ante, Lozia was hosting Kalia. The two exchanged pleasantries, without a single hint of hostility, all thanks to Alan's influence. Kalia was glad she took Alan's advice and came to see Lozia. Right in the middle of their conversation, they both realized that Alan was light years ahead of them. However, at its core, this was an alliance formed by Alan's orders. They both had no choice but to work together in harmony, since they were both under Alan's thumb, and a power struggle would ultimately be pointless. Lozia then asked Kalia why she was visiting now, even though their scheduled conference wasn't until next month. Kalia then revealed that Alan had sent a letter regarding her previous visit. Kalia shows Lozia the letter, and in it, Alan mentions Kalia's last visit to the manor and how everything went down. He adds that a few other nobles have also complained to him about it. Looking at the letter, it seems like just a standard apology letter, but the two girls are convinced there's a hidden message buried inside. Having reached this conclusion, they both believe it's best to talk it through. They waste no time dissecting the nobles within the kingdom and the factions they belong to. After much deliberation, the two come to the same conclusion. Alan despises all the nobles and their useless factions. With this mindset, they assume Alan wants to wipe out all the nobles. The two ladies believe Alan wants to purge the current nobility from the kingdom and establish a new regime. Basically, the two of them have overthought everything and reached the same conclusion, that Alan wants to be at the very top. Since they're so eager to help him out, they start discussing their game plan. Meanwhile, at the Blue Magic Tower, the Tower Master has arrived and is demanding to know every single detail about Alan's visit. At the same time, Alan is only worried about getting home ASAP so he can receive Jutia's monthly letter.